Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski here with Everything MSP. Welcome to today's event. We have a very exciting session, how MSPs can win with client mergers. We're going to be diving into one of the most timely and profitable opportunities facing MSPs right now, and that's the massive uptick in SMB mergers and acquisitions and what that means for your role as a technology leader. So we're going to set the stage on the market landscape so you can understand how big the opportunity really is. And I'm going to go ahead and bring in our special guest, Colin Hogg with MoveBot. Colin, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, Dan. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
There's Colin.
Yeah, I'm very well, Dan.
It's great to have you here. What time is it in your neck of the woods? What day is it in your neck of the woods?
Oh, well, for a change, I'm actually on the same day, but it's in the evening rather than the morning. Okay. So I'm actually in the UK at the moment. So.
Gotcha. Yep. Very good. Well, a lot of times when we talk, typically, it's a situation where it's the next day for you. So this is a little bit different.
It is.
But absolutely. So we're going to kick things off. Before we get started, if you could let our audience know a little bit about you, your role, and the organization that you represent.
Yeah, thank you. And to the audience, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out. So I'm Colin Hogg. I'm VP of Sales for both CouchDrop and MoveBot. And fundamentally, both what we're about as an organization is we move people's data around, whether it be from CouchDrop perspective, taking transactional data and uploading that into your chosen cloud storage via SFTP, AS2, and so on. Or what we're going to talk more about today is MoveBot, which is a fully cloud-based SaaS data migration tool that will hopefully help you with this particular subject and mergers and acquisitions.
Absolutely. And, so as we get started, there's a few things I wanted to address before we get into the weeds and the primary focus of our presentation today. When you take a look at mergers and acquisitions, the overall activity is heating up, especially in the SMB space. MSPs really are in a unique position to deliver some high value and, an overall infrastructure services during these client mergers, because, it's not just about the migration. It's just not about moving the data. It's about the transformation for the clients. And I think, Colin, you and I were speaking just a couple of days ago about how essentially we need to productize what we do, because if we just say, oh, we can move your data, we're undervaluing what we can do for them, right?
Absolutely, Dan. And, when the migrations are done, it's an absolutely fantastic opportunity for MSPs to really excel in this particular field. And you touched on it. It's moving the data as a component of this. It's an important component, but also so is the onboarding of the new users. So is the training of the new users into the different environment, and wrapping around a set of features, and also planning the migration, planning the project, so you can absolutely productize this whole offering, and essentially use the best set of tools to deliver the outcome. But it's still humans you're involved with, still people you're involved with, and there's absolutely that that interaction that can really set MSPs apart when they get that onboarding of the new users into a different platform, if that's the case. So there's a huge opportunity out there to really enhance that offering as an MSP.
And there's an organization, as far as the source, it's Axial, that did a study. They're indicating that in Q1 of 2025, there were 3,049 SMB deals in the U.S. It's the highest quarter ever. Globally, When you take a look at M&As, the value is up 15%. And in the U.S., the deal value has surged 26%. So when you take a look at this, especially in the SMB space, is pretty significant. And so, I think those are some of the things that we take a look at, that more and more organizations are experiencing merger or acquisition. And so that really primes us in the MSP space to be able to assist them, because, when you take a look at some of the common pain points, incompatibility. So you got systems and platforms that are incompatible. You've got permission misalignment. You've got data loss. There's business disruption, user frustration, which the last thing that we want to do in a merger or acquisition is, bringing together, two teams into one is, allowing them to experience that frustration. They're already, on edge because, this is new. We all experience change, and we all take change in a different way. And none of us really love change, but it occurs. Some of the other things where there's pain points when it comes to M&A is going to be compliance liabilities and breach risk, and just the whole unstructured, messy, and redundant data. I think all of those really sets the stage for MSPs to be able to jump in and provide, a fresh experience. And again, productizing it is not just moving the data, it's that transformation. It's about that business outcome, correct? Or business income.
Business income as well. Yeah. It's about both. And it's interesting when you look at the stats, certainly the 2025, there was not a lot of activity in 2022, post-COVID, 2023, 2024.
Yeah.
Things in terms of the M&As were a little bit quieter. And I think now, those stats are incredibly interesting if you're looking at it from business opportunities and a trend perspective. And this, as you say, it's a very timely conversation to have about that. So I think you're seeing 2025. I would be, we're already seeing uptick in the platform with people doing M&A migrations at this point in time. But I would expect to see that following through, with the new financial year that's just ticked over in the US. So I think it's always worthwhile when you look at these things, considering what's the macro environment, what's actually happening. I spoke with a couple of people this week on M&As, and one's an existing client, and basically what they said is, we're just gearing up to get you to do quite enough. The comment was, we've just ticked over our financial year. We're into the new financial year, and we now have a list of M&As that we have to work through as a project team. So there is absolutely a great opportunity just to help productize that and really excel. So sorry, I kind of got distracted with the stats there, and just really, I guess, reinforcing that there's a really good opportunity out there for MSPs.
Yeah, absolutely. And and a couple other things I just wanted to mention is that we got to really reframe that value. So like I said, it's not just a migration, but, we're not selling that task, we're selling that transformation. And we got to position ourselves as M&A data management experts, because we're looking at discovery, we're looking at cleanup, compliance, integration, training, optimization, and that productization with clear deliverables, a timeline, business outcomes. So we manage it as a project, and in the true way to manage that properly as a project is using the right tool. And that's part of what we're talking about here today. So let's just kind of kick things off. What are some of the initial things that you see that MSPs should be focused on?
Well, certainly if we focus on the tooling and essentially using a tool. I think first of all, whether it's MoveBot or whether it's something else, but fundamentally use a tool. Tools are there designed to deliver a really solid result. So you covered a number of things in the potential challenges when it comes to it's unstructured data that we're dealing with. You're looking at permissions. You want to ensure and be absolutely guaranteed that when you've done your migration and you've got the data or the email users and so on, everything is where it should be. So handling things like if you're coming from a disparate system, if, say, for example, you're coming out of Google and going into SharePoint or Ignite or one of the other platforms, whatever it is that the acquiring company has, there's going to be some things that you've got to be careful of, and converting documents into a Microsoft format, making sure that you've not got duplicate file names sitting in there, making sure that you've got all your characters that are going into the destination platform are taken care of. So you really want to make sure all of that stuff's sanitized automatically by the tool. You really don't want that to be left to risk. In the discovery phase, you can run a scan. You run a full scan on the source, and sometimes there may be some challenges in doing so, and ensuring that you can get from, because it might not be the whole organ. And in a small SMB, it would most likely be the whole organization that you're moving in an acquisition, but in maybe a larger acquisition, or say a group of companies, the tenant that you're maybe coming out of also may have other information. So depending on what that tenant is, you may need to just be granted access to those particular users and so on. So setting that up as a discovery in that discovery process, and ideally running a discovery scan, will actually give you a wealth of information about what the migration is going to look like.
What I was going to ask you is, let's talk about those challenges, because, when you do that discovery, you do identify a number of challenges. And I think there's quite a few that they're critical that many MSPs may have run into in the past, or and if they haven't, that's what we're here to try to be proactive and educate. But some of the first few, and I'll let you jump into what each of them are. But I mean, I think one of the first ones to address is just those diverse platforms and data structures, right?
Yeah. So obviously, if you're depending your source and destination, some of your cloud environments are going to be a very flat structure. The Googles of this world, the Dropboxes of the world, are really quite flat structures. And if you're going into platforms, particularly SharePoint, for example, that's a very hierarchical structure. But also, those platforms have their limitations. What's allowed in one platform, it may not be allowed in the other. And the other thing that comes into that aspect is when it comes to things like permissions. Really, best practice is whilst it's always possible to migrate permissions, it might not be the best practice, and unless it's, say, SharePoint to SharePoint, when it's a very similar structure. But if you're going from, for example, a Google structure and the permissions are shared in a certain way, and trying to adopt those permissions into SharePoint or Ignite or some of the other platforms, or vice versa, going into Google, the same thing applies. We're having the flexibility to go cross-platform is great, but actually, when you re-permission the data in accordance with the best practice of the destination platform, that's again part of that consultative process, and establishing that as a point of difference in what you're doing. There is a risk if you just automatically apply the permissions across, unless it's same. tenant to tenant type things.
Right.
So, just taking when MSPs just think this out, establish what those permissions are, figure them out, download the CSV, download the report from that, and then you can then look at repermissioning appropriately in the destination platform. So that really helps significantly with that, with that particular task, but also when it comes to the data quality and the integrity that goes across, you can that the data is going to get to where it's meant to go.
Yeah.
In the destination. Yeah.
And I think each of these can be addressed if we think through the process ahead of time. And I think the thing is that proactive process, policies, procedures. I mean, just like anything, would you agree that obviously the more of these type of migrations, these transformations that we focus on, the better we become, and the more of a well-oiled machine that we have. And let's talk a little bit about the importance of how you need to learn from each opportunity. And as you have challenges, you want to debrief and make sure that you look at it and say, okay, what can we do to avoid this in the future, right?
Yeah, there's often going to be things that will come along, and there will be curly things that might come along between certainly different data types and so on, and taking that time just to reflect and go, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, and what we can learn from the future is incredibly valuable, because that again helps build that knowledge base within your organization as an MSP to reliably go out and not be scared of and doing a migration into or between platforms that you might not be that familiar with. So just taking that time and learning from that is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. And and I think one, I just want to kind of reiterate and go over one of the largest aspects is the downtime and business disruption. Because yes, no matter how well we plan, there's always going to be Murphy's Law, something's going to happen, right? However, if we don't put the appropriate time and energy into planning and preparation, the chances of things going south are pretty significant. Where have you seen overall, like just overall reductions in downtime in business disruption when MSPs are truly planning ahead, doing that discovery? And I've always in every type of project, I always think about what to expect, and these are things that we communicate with the client: what to expect and what could go wrong. And if we go over these things, things will pan out much better with the client if there is some kind of a hiccup than if we don't go over these.
Yeah, and setting those expectations are crucial. I think it's like any business interaction that you're doing. You should really be setting those frank and honest expectations. Now, sometimes there will always be pressure to get things done quicker. And one of the key things to talking about the planning and preparation, and I'll go back to this sort of discovery element here. If you're doing a discovery element and you suddenly just you're running it, and you might say, okay, well, the best plan that I can take for this migration is to move department by department. From a change management perspective, I can work with each department. I can bring the marketing department up. I can bring the accountant department up, and that might just be a handful of people, or it might be a few hundred people. You just don't know what you're going to necessarily be dealing with. But being able to segment the move, and rather than trying to do this whole big bang of getting everything over, trying to get all done on a weekend, that will generally lead to not a great result, because you can't do everything. You all have a limited set of resources. You have a limited set of talent within any organization. And if you talk about user training, it's easier to train a smaller group of people and get them on board, set the expectations up, and even run a test, do some tests, or bring some of that, find a user, bring that across, run that and test it all up with the users, especially if they're disparate platforms. If you're going from, if you've been used to in a Google environment and operating the way that Google operates, and then you go into a Microsoft environment, they're very, very different. You find your product champion, do a test migration, bring just that one user across, get them on board and help them with the onboarding. And of course, if you're able just to segment that migration across. The other thing I'll add into the equation here, and again comes back to the tooling aspect, is speed is really important. If you can do that across both quickly and reliably and know that the data is exactly where you want it to be, that makes that whole process really, really easy. But a point that we often see as a challenge is you might come across an incredibly dense data set. So whilst the volume of data may be small, it may be, I think some of the worst examples we've seen is something like 80 gig of data, and then within that there's a few million files. That particular data set will take longer to come across than 8 terabytes of 100 meg files. 8 terabytes of 100 meg files, I'm being extreme here, but that will come across in a day. For most platforms, we're doing, the API calls, we're not going to be rate limiting and so on. But when you come across an incredibly dense set of data, maybe we just want to say, okay, well, that part of that migration is going to run a little bit slower. We know it's going to run a little bit slower. So, within, I don't talk about SharePoint as a destination, it's something to think about. That data is going to consume a lot more API calls. So it's just going to take longer. And when you're consuming API calls, it will slow everything else down. So you've just got to make a decision of saying, okay, well, maybe I want to either run that well in advance because I know that that's going to take a little bit of time. Then you do a little delta later on and true it up. That could be a really valid thing. And then that's taken care of. Or you might say, okay, well, this is not that critical in the business. I'll run that a little bit later and bring that across. So having the ability and the tool to pick and choose and really be sensible to get a great result at the end, it makes a massive difference. And that's probably one of the most common things that we see is we run up against this rate limiting, and then suddenly we have to get this done by this date, and we have this incredibly dense data that's we're trying to move across, and it's consuming API calls and so on. So that's definitely something I would always say: planning, preparation. Know in advance that that's what your challenge is going to be. Talk to your client about it and say, hey, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge. The rest of this, we're fine. It's going to happen. Right. We can get this across. But this data set, and at least if you can explain why in a logical sense, most people will understand that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and really, I think if we have those open and honest conversations, if we lay it out, up front about what those challenges could be, we shouldn't be afraid to, let them be aware of what those challenges are. Because if we don't let them be aware of the challenges, if we're afraid to have those conversations up front, imagine how afraid we are going to have those conversations when we don't do that and things go south, things don't go the way that they're hoping. Those are more difficult conversations. And nobody wants to be in that position to say, Mr. Client, I know you wanted this done for Monday morning. I know you expected that your staff was going to kick things off at 8 a.m. on Monday and things were going to be, rocking and rolling, but it's not going to happen. We might be looking at Wednesday. That's the difficult conversation, not the proactive conversation. And, and we have to not be afraid of telling clients the things that they don't necessarily want to hear, especially if they may spring a project up on us last minute, because we do know that happens, and it's not always, not always due to their poor planning. Sometimes things just happen, and and we have to jump through hoops. And but having those conversations with them will go so much further along in the process. And like you mentioned, as far as determining which data needs to be moved over, because if they've got a ton of data overall that needs to be moved, and only 20% of that data is something that is going to that truly impacts, is something that they use regularly, then let's make sure that we're prioritizing that. And do you see that happening enough, or do you think more needs to be done? Is there more of a mindset of a one and done? We got it. We pushed it all over. We got it all done in one big swoop. Or is there enough planning where MSPs are saying to the client, what is most important, and let's only move that data over right now?
I think, in fairness, there's a few more of those conversations happening now when you have the ability to say, actually, I'm only interested at this stage in moving data that is, 2 years, only up to 2 years old. That data past 2 years, we need it, we will take it across. But if I'm under pressure, and in that instance, and we know it does happen when the client comes along and says, hey Dan, I need this done by next Tuesday. It's Thursday. Sorry, we didn't know much about it. Couldn't tell you. It was confidential. It was part of that thing. But we need to get this actioned by next Thursday. And they might have 10 terabytes of data and 150 mail migrations to bring across, and they're going into something like a SharePoint platform. That's a conversation. You say, okay, well, can we cherry pick the users that we're bringing across? Can we cherry pick the data? Can we keep that? Just the newer data coming across? And then when you set up the tool to do that, you're only going to move a fraction of that data. You're only going to move a fraction of those users, and you stand a chance of hitting that deadline. But yeah, just being aware, and also being aware that and communicating that there may be limitations that are completely outside of everyone's control, which I keep going back to data rate limits and so on. Once we can move data incredibly quickly into lots of different platforms, including SharePoint, if the data structure is really nice. If we come across, again, preparation, one of the things when you're planning it is saying, okay, well, we're running a true story that, again, beginning of this week, I was talking with an MSP. I've been using us. The data was moving. It was moving fine, but they had to, actually, it was Wednesday last week. I lied. It wasn't this week. It was last week. But it was UK MSP doing a data migration for a client, and they had a backup tool running on the source tenant. Not on the destination tenant, they were in control of that. But the backup tool running on the source tenant was consuming API calls. So that was limiting our ability to pull the data from that source tenant and put it into the destination. It was a SharePoint migration. So a little bit of preparation, saying, okay, well, let's pause all those things. And that you have that conversation. You're having that, rather than it being that pressured conversation of, you must get this done. To get this, if you've done it in advance, everyone knows, everyone's happy, and it sets up those, again, set yourself up for success rather than setting yourself up for failure, basically.
Right. A question came in, and the question was, if the data is already a mess, is it really our responsibility or the client's? I've got some thoughts on that, but I'll let you jump in on that one.
I think it's like anything. It's a conversation. I mean, if the data is in a mess, tell the client the data's in a mess and set some expectations around it. you don't know how the client is going to want to use that data, what structure they require. They have to give you that information. So I think being able to restructure the data and move things around, again, come back to the flexibility of the tool you're using, enables a really, really great outcome there. But actually having the conversation with the customer, that's my opinion. I mean, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think, it is our responsibility because, we are the experts on multiple fronts. But I think, how we differentiate ourselves is by, thinking beyond the technology and thinking from a business perspective. And, if we have a conversation with them, if all we're thinking about is the migration versus the transformation, a migration is, hey, this is what you got. This is what you get. It's garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. If we're talking about a transformation, part of our process is to say, okay, let's take a look at your data structure. How well is this working for you? And, if end users are struggling with, how they find data, and, if there's a mix of data that might be, for management, that's geared more towards management, maybe containing, much more sensitive information, things that are only privy to certain eyes. And maybe some of that data is intermixed with what anybody else can see. We should have those conversations with them, especially if things are a mess. We want to do it right, done right the first time. And talk about differentiating us and truly making us more than just a technology group, that we're a business technology group, and that we're helping them think through that process. That's my thoughts from that perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But again, it comes down to actually having a purposeful conversation in and around that and flagging it. That's in that planning. You'll find that out in your planning process.
Yep. So, let's jump into some ways that we can overcome the challenges. We do know that successful data migration during an M&A process requires that strategic planning, and leveraging the right technology. So let's talk about, that framework for best practices in ways that MoveBot's, capabilities have available to MSPs. And, let's talk through like some of those different layers. So that let's talk about a best practice in regards to that comprehensive pre-migration assessment and what MoveBot can do to help in that area.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the key things is with MoveBot, you've got connection to over 30 different platforms. So when you're doing your pre-migration analysis, part of that will be to run a discovery scan. And what that discovery scan will do is it will show you how much data that you have. It will also show you where you might be expecting to see some data in the client's portal, but the user or the admin that you're connecting to when you set up the connections, again, it's an easy process to do that. But when you set up those connections, you might discover that actually I don't have I'm expecting, I was told this migration was 5 terabytes of data. I'm only seeing 2 terabytes of data. What's happened? Why isn't that the case? Again, there's a challenge. Initially, you run the scan and you find out that the data actually hasn't been shared with that admin user, depending on the platform. So you can tackle that. Then you can get access to that. So again, when you can rerun the scan, you can get more information out of that. And so you've already headed off a problem. You've already said, oh, I've discovered that there's an issue there. The scan will also highlight if there's any challenges that will actually won't stop the tool as such, but for that section of data may not be moved. So it will tell you if there's it'll give you long file names. Now we've no magic about changing long file names, but you could be clever. You could move the parent folder a few levels up. That reduces the file names, and therefore it's easier to move. So that, again, in that planning of that migration, you're going, the destination platform doesn't support this. If I do this, I can then pick that folder set, that data set, and move it to where I want it to go. So again, you can, and I'll come back to probably one of the ones. I mean, for most of the stuff, most of the data, you're going to move it really quite quickly, but there might be some of those exceptions where you come across an incredibly dense data set. If you know about that from the get-go, that's easy to tackle. And that pre-migration scan gives you all that information. It's free to do as well. So there's no cost to do that. You can do that well in advance. You can do that weeks before you do the migration if you have that level of time. But even if you do it a few days beforehand, and then you're working on the project, it allows you to structure the project accordingly. You can also do you can also basically set a rule to say, oh, ignore all the data that's older than that time period. I only want the new data. What does that look like? And then you can set around expectations of actually how long this will take and so on. So so that's that pre-scan of the source platform is so important in doing an M&A, and important when doing a migration, but particularly important in this instance.
Yeah. So that's the comprehensive pre-migration, assessment. So, which, like you said, you can do it well in advance. I think it's great to do it well in advance, especially during the quoting process. And when you do that well in advance, it really shows that we, have all of our ducks in a row, and that we truly are working to make sure that this is successful. So let's move on to that next step of that planning and project management. Let's talk through some of those best practices.
Yeah. So I think once you're in, you've done the planning, you've decided, you've mapped your transfers out. So part of that planning process, saying, okay, I've got this dense data set. I'm going to treat that in the way that you've decided to treat it. But then I've got all these other things. Now I'm going to map this out, and I'm going to move this. I'm going to structure this data. Coming back to that comment or to that question, the data set's in a mess. Okay, well, we know it's in a mess, but we know this data here has got to go to this point here. Well, I can map that out, and having that granularity to map that out, that helps solve that problem. And then you push the go button. And it's one of the things that's really great about when you push the go button. You can sit, and if you want, you can watch the tail logs. You can see the real-time data moving. We'll also flag up if we are hitting issues with things like rate limiting and so on. But that is all completely transparent and completely visible to you. So you'll see what the platform's doing, we'll back off, etc. But having that sort of giving you that clear visibility of exactly what's happening. And again, that allows you to communicate with the client, keep them informed, keep the client informed. Right. They can know what's happening. It really just helps, running multiple things at the same time, and just really help. That visibility will help with that, streamlining that whole project management scale side.
All right, then what about, as far as leveraging some migration tool features that are built in?
Yeah, again, we support over 30 different platforms, but you've got to make sure that, if we need to rename files to suit the destination with that, removing illegal characters, file name sanitization, deduplication, make sure that that's all done, taken care automatically. If you leave that to a manual process of trying to do that, there's potential for errors. So with MoveBot, of course, we do that automatically. It's those are set as de facto settings when you set the process up in MoveBot. Those default settings are in when you set the project up. They're there for a reason, just to make life incredibly easy.
Yeah. So of course, when we take a look at this, there's also compliance that comes into place. We're going to jump into that, security and compliance. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about data cleansing and governance, and the aspects around those type of best practice features that we need to look at?
Yeah. So the last thing you want in the destination is for something to not appear for a start. So you need to know that the data gets from one place to another. So that visibility in the reporting is absolutely crucial. But you don't want duplicates. You don't want that illegal characters, data not getting somewhere because they've got a hashtag and their hashtag isn't allowed in the destination platform, and the like. So you again, the tool takes care of all of that. And if we sort of slide into that sort of question you posed there about the security and compliance, that's absolutely crucial in what we're doing. In terms of a platform, in terms of an organization, we're SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, which covers off most of that compliance issues. But the ability when you need to automatically migrate permissions, if that's what you choose, then that's great. And preserving all those sorts of security connections and bringing some of that metadata across, column metadata in SharePoint, for example, and so on. That all makes that transformation much easier in the destination.
Yeah. And I mean, security and compliance, like you said, I mean, those components, I mean, we all love security and compliance, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Send me another question here.
Yeah, exactly. So you talked about pressing the go button, and I love that. I got a little chuckle out of that one because we all were like, no, you press it. No, you press it. It's so nobody wants to be the person to press the button because when it's go time, there's a little bit of sweat coming off the forehead. Because then we're talking about testing and validation before we get to that point. So let's jump into that area.
Yeah, that do test it. Run a test migration. If it's an email migration, do one. The cost is minimal. But then it comes back to that. You can embrace a user to help with your transformation. It helps with that, what the training requirements are, and so on as well. But crucially, that you can set the user has an expectation of what it looks like. What it's going to look like when it gets to the destination, whether that be mail, whether that be file data. Just run a small test migration. Check it out. Don't be scared of spending a few dollars just to get that bit done. Hey, if you're really worried about it, we'll give you a couple of test credits of our mail migration. We'll give you a few gig just to test it out, to know that from at least that migration perspective, you're going to get the data where it wants to go. But crucially, all of that, once you've done that, you can download the reports. You can see what the report's like. You've got that proof that then what you can do is stick that report along, in that file or in the project file at the end, and say, hey, I know that the data went from this point to that point. But just run those. So it's probably one of the things not enough MSPs do is they'll just go, hey, we've got this tool, tick, 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 bang, bang, bang. And then suddenly they go live. They go live, as you say, push the go button, and suddenly we're migrating all this data. And you get a user on the, this is not what we expected. Just do those test migrations. The cost is minimal. But the savings are massive. The expectation setting is massive. The benefits are massive for literally a few dollars.
Yeah. Well, I liken it. This might be a weird analogy, but I liken it to, you have a room in your house and you want to paint it. You want to throw a new color on, and you get the paint, you come home and you're so excited that you want to start putting paint on the walls instead of taking the time to properly tape things off. Take all your switch covers off, put the tape up, get it all set from that perspective, do all the edging before you start start rolling on the walls. I mean, you got to slow down. Yes, you're ready to, just hit that go button, but but you got to slow down and just do all that other preparation, because otherwise you have a mess on your hands. And so the last thing that I want to cover from this perspective, as far as best practices, is going to be user training and support. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think this is, I don't know how many MSPs in the traditional sense of the MSPs and, for instance, like the Microsoft world and so on, actually spend on this. If you're getting an onboarding customers from a system that they've not been used to, and again, simply talk about, say, going into from Google into SharePoint or Google into Ignite. It's a different user experience. There's a huge opportunity there to build in as part of your package that you're offering the customer, and a real value add there to do that. For that user training, it's you're not just going to. Well, I would generally recommend you're going to be coding this out as a project or as an ongoing service, depending on your relationship with the customer or who it is. But being able to actually then offer that user training for the end users. From an internal perspective, with MoveBot, one of the beauties of MoveBot is we've purposefully designed the UI to be incredibly intuitive to run. It's a piece of feedback that we always get. And then, again, knowing the comprehensive reporting that we have and the ability for us to support, obviously, MSPs, which is great. We always do that. But just being able to have that comprehensive reports and know that the data is there, have that confidence it's there, have that proof, have that, talk about that data integrity and that compliance, just to make sure it's actually there. That's, we do our best to make a tool that's really, really easy for MSPs to use and achieve great things in doing this for an M&A or any other migration. But so that's, huge opportunity in that user training. And then from our perspective, we deliberately try and make the tool really, really straightforward to use and with great visibility.
So Jeff just threw a question out actually a few minutes ago that I want to cover that I think it really is a good segue to what we're going to talk about next. And what he asked was, how do we differentiate ourselves from another vendor who is more focused on price? So what are your thoughts in this area?
I think we've talked about it sort of through this, that the relationship with the client, the opportunity to position yourself as an expert with the information and to have credible conversations and give absolute confidence to the end client that you are actually going to achieve what you said you're going to achieve, and deliver not only just getting your data from A to B, you're going to deliver a wraparound service. You're going to give them that visibility of the process. You're going to, sorry, somebody phones me. That's apologies for that. I just got rid of that. So having all, being able to differentiate yourself just with actually having a wraparound. There will always be someone cheaper. We live in this environment. There's free tools out there. If the free tools did everything that they were meant to do, we wouldn't exist. I think actually offering that whole quality of a service around and explaining where the value comes, explaining what you're going to do, really makes a difference. So that's, you have to have that, be able to sort of, don't think like a techie, think like what I want. That whole offering, not just the technical bits. Technical bits are actually to some extent the easy bits, pushing the buttons, wrapping around those soft skills, and setting expectations, and then meeting or exceeding those expectations with the client, I think is really where you add that value, and that kills any price conversations ultimately.
Another question had come in of whether doing any kind of migrations like this should be bundled into your MSP services, or if it should be separate. I'll let you jump into that, and then I'll share my thoughts.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you're dealing with, if your client is a private equity firm, for example, that's doing M&As all the time, that should be absolutely built into the part of the service and just part of your MSP model. It just gives you, and being able to leverage that all the time. You're the go-to when it comes to them, for that client, for example. So I think it is one of those. It depends on the situation.
Sure.
If you are, again, if you're doing your QBRs with your customers and they start talking about certain things or questions and so on, might be them. Obviously, M&As before it happen are often usually confidential, but there might be some questions that come up. And that might just be a conversation to say, hey, do you know if this happens? This is a set of services that we can offer, and that would, again, wrapping it up into your service offering. But I guess a lot of times it's going to be a project as well.
Yeah, I think I do like what you're saying. If they're in that type of acquisition mode where it's going to be ongoing, and you have a good idea of what those acquisitions look like, and maybe over the next year what they're planning, you could definitely build all that in. But if we're talking about one-offs, if they're it's just more happenstance that they've got a merger coming up, or they're acquiring another company. I mean, it should definitely be a project. Just because it is up and above, it's, beyond the normal scope of day-to-day management of their technology and so on. As we work to wrap things up, I'd like to, have you go through how MoveBot enables success for MSPs.
Yeah, thank you. One of the key things is MoveBot is 100% SaaS. We are 100% cloud-based. You don't have to worry about setting up any infrastructure or installing any software, or hardware to manage. You basically, you can literally spin things up and connect up. The automatic error handling is also crucial. So So when we're actually migrating data across, the platform will automatically try a number of times to get that data across. It's not just a one-off, I've got this bit of data, I'm going to take it across. If we can't get access to that, we'll try it around about 20 times. If that still doesn't come across, we'll skip that and we'll move on to the next thing and carry on. But the tool itself will carry on. But you will see if that's happened. And then you can rerun those errors and failures. So you, from that sort of granular error reporting, you can see that. And then, once you've done your migration, running a Delta migration is absolutely critical there. So it might, if you're working with users, depending on the platform, invariably someone will still have a file open. Someone will, before they do the changeover, there'll be some, over on a Friday night, someone's left their computer on, there's still a file accessed, it's not synced to the cloud or something like that. And it's a small amount of data. So before you do that sort of final cutover, you can run a Delta, or you can run a number of Deltas. So there's no harm in getting all your data across initially and then running a number of Deltas. So that helps in that whole automated, or an element of the automated side of things. The analytics, the real-time dashboards, the logs that you can see, and the downloadable reports that you can get are absolutely crucial. And that's the thing that's going to help you in that communication with the client and setting those expectations. Regional, for security and compliance, SOC 2 I've mentioned before. Regional data residency. So within MoveBot, if you're operating with a client in Europe, you can run it in our Amsterdam POP. If you're operating in the UK, it's London POP. If you're in the US, you can choose New York or San Francisco. So the data doesn't go out those geographical boundaries, and that makes a big difference as well. And you've got obviously access controls for the users running the migration. Finally, we know these are pressure situations and so on, and our support team are there to help. They're very expert. We've really got expert assistance in there, and if there's questions, queries, they will work with you and your team to make things really, really great. We like to build great product to minimize that support so that you've got a lot of that information in the product. But hey, sometimes there are these squirrely things that happen, and we're there to help as well. So, yeah.
Before we wrap up, one other question came in, and I'd like to jump on this one. The question was in regards to, she indicates we don't do a lot of migrations. So do we really need to go through this entire process of, building out a very large, migration, solution when it's more of a one-off? My opinion is absolutely. First and foremost, whether it's one client or one migration or 10 or 100, you want to make sure that it goes off without any issues. You want to ensure that you have the policies and procedures in place, that you have the structure in place, so that one migration, even if it's one, is rock solid, because that one migration could lead to two. That experience could turn into building business through a referral, because how your support and how you helped them was beyond expectations, and it gave them the comfort that they needed during an M&A. And and you could build a practice around doing M&A migration work, doing these transformations. If you see that opportunity, build it out, invest that time. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Colin?
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, we have a resource, and maybe post this, we can post the link, which is a migration practice, best practice guide for MSPs. So we've actually written this up. So whilst hopefully people will watch this and learn, there is a resource available that we can deliver. But yeah, at the end of the day, you want, regardless of the job, and you touched on it earlier on, a migration is also a transformation. If you're onboarding clients into your stack, with they may come in, you'll be doing a migration. It might not be an M&A, but if you're doing a migration from Google into SharePoint or into Google or Dropbox or whatever the platform, it doesn't really matter from our perspective. Then having this process and delivering a great result that the client is happy with, and it matches the expectations of what they have, then that is it's a good thing to do. The other resource, and again, maybe we can post this particular question, is that we have actually built out a guide to the different platforms. So because we don't expect everyone to know all the different platforms, but if you want a bit of a guide, again, I'll share the link. It's an independent website from our perspective, but it'll give you a guide of what SharePoint looks like, expectations, what Dropbox, what Ignite, etc., etc. I think we've covered five or six of the main data sharing platforms in there. So that is a resource that's available to go and have a look at, and it's easy. It's actually really straightforward and designed to be an easy read. It's not terribly complex. So yeah, it's an opportunity in that result to answer those questions. Yeah.
Very good. And anybody wanting to learn more about MoveBot, you can go to movebot.io. That's movebot.io. Of course, also, if you are on the everythingmsp.com website, you can search for MoveBot directly from there, and you can reach out directly to them from that point. Any parting words?
Yeah, I think MSPs who sort of really devise these strategies and get things set up with a really great process can make themselves absolutely indispensable in M&A scenarios. From our perspective, us delivering sort of seamless, secure, and efficient data migrations is absolutely key to helping people achieve that. And our platform, I'm obviously biased, is a great platform for leveraging MSPs. So yeah, reach out to us. We're here to help. Yeah,
Awesome.
Thanks, man.
All right, Colin, thank you so much. For all of our audience, thank you for listening to us today. Until next time, have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.